This is Barack Obama's short form birth certificate. It is a piece of security paper with black and white printout done from a laser printer. And it has this extra pattern put over it, according to some of the sources, to add in another layer of security. We're not doing this one, but again, this is a printout from a file on a computer. And they used several fonts, and everything lines up nice and neat because this was synthesized out of a computer the day the damn thing was printed out, because that's how they do it everywhere, including for you and me. Next. This is supposed to be the long-form birth certificate, as everybody thinks it's supposed to be. It doesn't have footprints on it. And it's got everything's at slightly different grayscale levels because of alteration or whatever you want to claim. All right? Okay, cool. Now let's go on. This is the PDF file, and it's identical to the one that was on the U.S. government website presented, because I grabbed a copy then, and I also grabbed it again because I can get it off of archive.org. I'm going to point out that the word none has N-O-N at a different grayscale level than the E, and Barack Obama, the R, is also at a different grayscale level than the rest of the word, and they may not be the same grayscale levels between these two errors in grayscale. This is a close-up of it using a JPEG, and I used this, and I wanted to see if I could rip it apart and clean it up and get rid of all the green. So this is what I was able to do. It's pretty close. Now, the reason I did that is it still retains the grayscale R, and actually makes it easier to see, and same thing with none, and a few other things. Now I'm going to show you the raw images ripped out of the PDF file. These are called layers by a bunch of people. It's not a layer. These are elements used to form and construct an image. Now, obviously, we right-click this because it's a JPEG. The rest of them are PNG files. They don't carry any EXIF data because, at the time, they didn't integrate EXIF data. And it says there's nothing there to work with, or it's not able to retrieve it. They reach the end. Now, when I take the image and make it to where we get it more sensible looking like this, guess what happens when I right-click it after I have rotated it? Nothing else. Oh, gee. It says Adobe XMP, and down here it says Microsoft. Microsoft Windows Photo Viewer, version 6. And it shows the date. It says I modified it. Because every time you touch it, it's going to say it's modified. The original file here that's supposed to be a layer that, oops, got through because someone said Photoshop made it, doesn't have any metadata. Okay, they scrubbed it, right? Okay, well, let's look at some qualitative characteristics. Why would you say that this was the job of somebody trying to forge a document if it looks literally like, and an emphasis added, it looks like almost like somebody took a piece of plastic tape, put it over a real document, and literally ripped the letters off? Because for all intents and purposes, that is the computer programming algorithmic equivalent to what happened to this document. Some computer routine took this perfectly innocent picture scan, originally this was probably a PNG, or it could have been a TIFF file, and ripped it apart. No, this isn't constructed to fool you, but I'm going to show you that the R is there in this layer, but the none of the word of none is there. Where'd it go? Well, here's the other layer. This layer is actually called a stencil, and that's actually the name that's used internally. There's the E from none, and there's Barack with the R there. Where'd the non go? Okay, well, here are the other layers. You're calling them layers. I'm going to call them layers too. They're not layers. And there's non. You notice something about it? It's really dark. What happens is it's put over the top, and then with a clear background, which is white in this case, and then it tells it to use a half grayscale value for it, and this makes it take up less space. Why would anybody do that? The same reason every computer routine messes up a file to the point that it makes me want to vomit, so that it'll take up less space, or work faster, or be more optimized. Now, I'm going to point out something. If you were forging this document, the first thing you would do is make sure that all of the characters transferred over to the black pattern here. You see, this is your template because it has all the lines on it, and I would make sure all of these numbers and everything were right where they're supposed to be. I would manually correct that because you can see that they're all over here where they don't belong. Next, I'd make sure all of the data that was of one type, like that R, was in here, and then I'd make sure the signatures and everything else that was flowery was consistently in another file. And I would use, in fact, a vector graphics routine to where it would literally draw the words so it would be impossible to tell. And I would separate the word of out from the word Dave or whatever that name is and make sure they were totally separated. But this layer would just be the boxes and lines and only the stuff that would be on the form like they had when they did it originally. And all of these other elements would be separate elements. So someone's trying to tell me that someone manually and on purpose created these layers that are still visible in the file with this level of horseshit, and that this is somebody attempting to falsify a document. I want to point out, emphasis added, the assertion from the state of Hawaii is that this information in this file is literally matching what they have on records. It doesn't matter if someone faked it. If I sat down and did this in crayon, they could still say, yeah, that's accurate information. It's not authentic, but it's accurate information and it matches him. That's all they're saying about it. Really? Well, it is. But the other thing they're saying is they certify that this thing is exactly the same thing that came from them, same as I could do, but they said they made this because they made a paper sheet that's this. This is a picture of a piece of paper. All right? The PDF file isn't an authentic document. No, it isn't, because a PDF file is not a document. It's an image of a document. They could decide to certify the JPEGs and all that, but they don't have to. And again, emphasis added, these are components that are used to build one image. They were extracted so that this thing could be 256 color, and the rest of it could be done in black and white with the lowest compression. I mean, how large is this file? This file here, if I was actually bringing up the inspect element or image data, would tell you, okay, view image info, screw it. Waiting. Okay. Yeah, unknown, not cached, size. Well, that's really useful. Anyway, this is like a couple of hundred bytes. Or a couple of kbytes. It's extremely tiny. These files are very small compared to what they would be. This thing here, because it's got color in it, is like a dozen times bigger. And again, if you were manually building this, which is the claim, I wouldn't leave these white tracks behind because that would make it look worse. I can go ahead and manually fix this if anybody wants me to, and I can make a better version of it that'll look nicer. I'm not going to reline up the characters because that would modify the document more than needed. And again, the people who say this is a fake, they point to anything that matches what you'd expect and say, well, it's too obvious that it was copy-pasted. And if it looks different, they say, see, they made a mistake while copy-pasting it. There's no such thing as any part of this document that's valid to them because that's all they're yelling about. Okay, now I'm going to get to the last of this. Okay, here we go. Forgery of Obama's birth certificate in 9 points by waptek. The birth certificate long-form PDF file is around 385 kbytes. If it wasn't compressed by doing this compression, almost like an MP3 does, it would be much bigger. It was done at 5:09 a.m. and 24 seconds, 2011, April 27th. Creator Preview PDF version 1.3 produced through Mac OS X 10.6.7, using Quartz PDF context. It has a blank title, author, and subject, and keywords in it. The entire file is just 9 pictures, a colored JPEG, and 8 monochrome PNG stencils that are used to compress it. The only reason they did the JPEG that size, which is actually the meat and potatoes of it, is because that's the best they could compress it. It gave up trying to clean up the image any better than that, and I wouldn't have been able to do that well. My attempt at it was worse than what it did automatically. PNG standard only supported metadata EXIF in 2017, so it doesn't have any EXIF data for the metadata for the PNG. There isn't anything in there that I can read either, although I could make more effort and get more data. There is, however, some metadata leaking through, but let me read you some information I found, because some other people have done this work before, and I'm not repeating it, I'm just going to tell you what they found and say that I confirmed it. The document was altered by an automated process to optimize it for file size. This has every sign of it. Most of the information that even matters for damn shit is black and white data over the top of, literally in this case, a background sheet that had way too many colors and really just had repetitive data. The computer routine chose to optimize for text on a background that is not white. That's probably the name of it. An OS X user or loser opened a file in Macintosh Preview, clicked the print to PDF option, and that sent the file data, whatever it was, to the Mac's Quartz PDF Context built-in PDF generation tool, and that is what saved it as a PDF file from whatever file it was. It could have been any file. We don't assume it's some Photoshop thing. There's a reason for it. It could be in anything, including a web page. I've optimized web pages to do the same thing. It makes them load faster. You make a background image and throw text over it, right? Well, you can also do the same thing with a see-through image, in fact, PNG, and do the same thing, and you can make it to where you don't have to pay some shyster someplace for embedding a font on your website. Yes, I did that for a bunch of clients. I made the elements exactly the same way. This could have been an HTML file originally. The original idea, though, is this is a scanned image by somebody taking a sheet of paper and put it in a scanner. So let's continue with that idea in a minute. But let's look at what actually was in there. We're just taking it from the file. It did not take a blank document and add text to it because it ripped the text off of a non-blank document. If it was a blank document, or a template as I call it, it wouldn't have had the halos because I would have made sure it had the background from one good sheet. Or I would have cut and pasted the pieces together, clean it up. They are not independent layers. They're codependent layers. The PDF encoder took an existing image, separated it out into the layers poorly as masked elements created by the PDF encoder, or it would have been huge. Now that's the most likely suspect, but it could have been done some other way. Let's look at some more. Whether the source file came from the scanner doing that, which is most likely what it was, or a word processor, because it wouldn't have been a word processor, or an image editor program, which, if it was an image editor program, somebody was really, really bad at it. And also, I got to point out again, they had to go out of their way to take an image and rip out stuff in it when you didn't need to. So that meant they made literally double the effort? No, literally. Somebody had to do double the effort to cause that problem. That's a little bit much to believe. I don't think so. The PDF encoder took an existing image and ripped it apart into layers based on grayscale value and poorly masked the elements created by the PDF encoder, or it would have been huge. Now, whether it was from a scanner, a word processor, or whatever, it was converted to a PDF by the print save as PDF function or option in the preview application in Mac OS X, because that's what it says in the file. I have a link below if you want to read it, where I threw the PDF at it and said, give me the information. It told me all this. I'm going to read it if I can. Changing or having any preference or feature or change of any kind will change how the final PDF is built up, and altering it at any point would have left traces behind. The Mac preview function can open a file that has layers, yes. But it can also generate them if you're making a PDF for optimizing. But let's assume that. The Mac's Quartz PDF Context program to create a PDF file will also keep the layers because it'll make it faster to do. Okay, so it could have been a file with layers. This PDF metadata from the original creator program would be ripped out by it because it's going to reauthor it. So we can't find it in there. So the PDF's metadata doesn't show any particular program like Adobe Photoshop or whatever did it, but it also doesn't disprove it. But there's a problem here. The PDF used prefix numbering, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and postfix writing to the file. That's not anything that an Adobe product would ever do. The only thing that would do that is something that literally builds PDFs rationally by writing the objects in numerical order like you and I would, by deciding each piece it pulled loose in order was the file. The first layer it pulled off by doing the processing that it was going to write to the file was the first one it wanted to put down, the background. But that's how you and I would do it, right? But that's how Adobe does it. This isn't written that way. Authenticity can only be determined by the state of Hawaii because that's how the law is written. That's the whole point. That's why they can just print out data and say it's good. They said that it's authentic, and neither Obama or Hawaii have ever changed their story. It's consistent over the years. Why assume a manually manipulated file had to be done, or decide the document was edited before it was converted to a PDF when it wouldn't have been needed? And why would you assume this imaging would do it? Open any scanned PDF in Illustrator and show no layers. I dare you. Because it'll find layers if it's a PDF in almost all cases. You can find some that don't,